Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, this vote really gives the United States Senate a choice. On one side, we have the biggest banks in America and financial institutions, which are arguing that you as a consumer, as someone who uses their banks, should be basically signing an arbitration clause that denies to you the freedom to go to court. On the other side, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has argued these financial institutions are misusing this power, denying people access to courts, and it should come to an end. That's the choice. I think I know who's going to win. I'm not sure the party on the other side of the aisle would have called this issue if they didn't already have it lined up for the financial institutions. I know that many on the other side, maybe most, hate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau like the devil hates holy water. The notion that this agency is going to stand up for consumers across America is something they find repugnant, something they'd like to end tomorrow. I say thank goodness they're there. There ought to be one agency of the federal government, at least just one, that speaks up for the little guy when it comes to these transactions. Think about the 3.5 million people defrauded by Wells Fargo. These were people who had their identities stolen, had their Social Security numbers purloined for opening credit card accounts that they never asked for. 3.5 million of them. Let me tell you the story of one of them. It's a pretty interesting story. Her name's Tracy Kilgore. She's from New Mexico. She was not even a customer of Wells Fargo Bank, but she went in because she was the treasurer of the local chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She went to the Wells Fargo branch one day in 2011 to have the names on the organization's existing account changed. A few weeks later, she received a rejection letter for a Wells Fargo credit card that she'd never applied for. It turns out the bank teller at Wells Fargo had taken the information she'd given and submitted a credit card application on her behalf without her knowing it. The application was rejected and hurt Ms. Kilgore's credit score for a credit card she never asked for. Ms. Kilgore is fighting for her right to hold Wells Fargo accountable in court and to join with millions like her who've been victims of Wells Fargo's misconduct. The Republicans tonight are saying they feel sorry for Wells Fargo. They really do. To think that this company manufactured and created 3.5 million phony credit card accounts at the expense of customers like Tracy Kilgore doesn't seem to move them at all. Instead, they want to stand by Wells Fargo, which put in that credit card application an arbitration clause which said, Tracy Kilgore, you can't go to court. You can't have your day in court. You've given it up. You signed it away to Wells Fargo. Well, would Tracy go to court anyway? Let's say she had to file a new credit report that cost her $100. Is she likely to file a lawsuit against Wells Fargo? Well, probably not. But multiply that times 3.5 million people who were defrauded by this bank, and you understand how a class action suit could finally hold Wells Fargo's feet to the fire, hold them accountable for literally cheating this woman and millions just like her. The Republicans are arguing tonight we ought to feel sorry for Wells Fargo. I don't. I don't feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for Tracy Kilgore, who, because of the arbitration clause, lost her opportunity to go to court and ask for simple justice from a judge or a jury. How about Equifax? If you think 3.5 million people defrauded by Wells Fargo is a pretty awful situation, here's one dramatically worse. 145 million. That's, let me see, right off the top of my head, that's about half of the people in this country. 145 million Americans, 5.5 million who live in my state, that's almost half of our state population, had their personal data exposed in a massive Equifax data breach. In other words, if you had filed in a distant past and there was a credit card, report on you, Equifax had all the information about you and your family, your banks, your Social Security numbers, and all the rest of it. Equifax ended up with a massive breach. Somebody stole into their computer and stole your personal identity information to the tune of 145 million Americans. So listen, Equifax really felt badly about this. Here's what they said. Equifax, in response to this data breach, initially offered a free credit monitoring service for any customer who signed up out of the 145 million. In other words, we'll monitor to see if somebody stole your identity and they're misusing it and hurting your credit status. But they added something. As long as the customer signed a forced arbitration clause in fine print that prohibited them from joining a class action. Equifax wants to help you, even though they initially hurt you, as long as you will guarantee that you'll never hold them accountable in court. How about that for a deal? That's what the Republicans are defending tonight. Exactly what I just described. They feel sorry for Equifax. They feel sorry for Wells Fargo. They want to make sure that these banks and these credit companies really have a friend in the United States Senate. We don't know if Equifax, which now claims it will no longer impose this forced arbitration on victims, will stand by that if they're ever challenged in court. But we ought to ask ourselves why major groups across the United States, standing up for just ordinary Americans, find this Republican strategy on the floor tonight so reprehensible. Listen to the groups who oppose this effort. The American Legion, the Consumer Federation of America, the NAACP, the United Auto Workers, and many other consumer groups. They're saying, why won't somebody in Washington speak out for the average American who is being defrauded by these banks, defrauded by these credit agencies? Why won't somebody in the Senate stand up for the agency that finally said enough? Finally said that these financial institutions have had their way long enough. Many of these financial institutions are hiding behind your local hometown banks. You know the ones I'm talking about. I've got them in my hometown of Springfield, Illinois, and they're saying this is all about your local community banks and your credit unions. We don't want to hurt them. Here are the facts. 90% of your community banks and credit unions do not have these arbitration clauses in their agreements. You know who does? The big banks. 60% of the big Wall Street banks have these clauses, and they're the ones who are really behind this fight. The Wells Fargo and the other ones who want to maintain this right to stop consumers from going to court to protect themselves when they've been defrauded by banks and credit and financial institutions. This is a classic illustration of power in Washington. Is there any power in the hands of consumers and ordinary Americans? We'll find out on the vote tonight. I'm afraid it wouldn't be called on the other side of the aisle unless they figured that the banks were going to win again. It's unfortunate. We ought to live in a society where consumers have a fighting chance and the system's not rigged against them. Arbitration clause is a way to rig a contract so that a consumer is going to lose twice. Lose when the bank takes advantage of them, and lose when they try to go to court and they're stopped by the arbitration clause. Consumers in this country have a battle on every single day to make a living and to get by. This is an effort to take away one of your freedoms to go to court with a group of people who've been aggrieved just like you, have your day in court, win or lose. The Republicans want to take that away, and so do the banks. I hope they don't prevail. Mr. President, I yield the floor.